Ladies and gentlemen, we got a very special episode today. We have one of my former coaches and recent four-time state champion, coach of Webster Groves High School, Justin Mathis. Coach Mathis, I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks, Mal. Always good to catch up with you, man.
Yes, sir. So, fresh off of a state championship at the top of the mountain, how does it feel?
Good, especially because, I've said it 100 times, but this team grew as much as any team that I've had, or really have been around, even, from as an assistant or as a player, and from being very, very average and highly overrated in November, December to, January, playing better basketball, and then all of a sudden in February, picked up a couple wins that made me think, like, we got a chance to do this. So, just when you see your guys grow like that, it makes you proud as a coach, and that's what I think every coach, their goal is just that, your team hits their ceiling. They overachieve, and, whatever that might be. I think there's coaches that do a great job because their team goes 500 and they don't have 500 talent. Or so when you got good talent and they buy in, it turns it into a great year. And when you got a really good talent and they buy in, it turns it into a special year. And I think we were in that latter category this year.
Yeah, there's a big outcome bias, I guess, in basketball. Like, you're winning, okay, everything's cool, we didn't make any mistakes. We lost, okay, everything's bad. Did you have to balance that? Like, there were some wins you were saying we could be better, losses kind of picking them up?
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, can you win or can you learn from a win is huge, because, you hope to have a 20-win season, and so then you're going to lose 5 or 6 times. But if you only learn from it 5 or 6 times, you're in trouble, especially come March. So I think that's a big, that's huge, is that you've got to figure out and continue to learn from wins and know that, the standard is the standard, and, whether you played great or terrible, there's something you can take away from it. I think that a big part of what you're talking about, you play a challenging schedule that, that exposes your weaknesses early. You go against really good coaches that have a good game plan, and, see how people want to attack you both offensively and defensively. I think that really helped us, especially as, state championship. We played a Summit Christian team that I thought was very well schooled, had a good game plan, tried to load up the paint early against Scotty. Their off-the-ball movement on offense was really good, and just had a senior point guard that was tough as nails, could control the tempo. He wasn't going to turn it over. They didn't take many bad shots. So haven't seen that before, I think really helped prepare us.
So you touch on it a little bit, kind of the ebbs and flows of the season. How would you compare or contrast this team versus the other 4 or other 3 that you've been a part of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We were already joking around that, my new assistant's like, oh, this team could totally beat 22. And I was like, I don't know about that. And, obviously we can go back and debate some of your teams in the 17 and 18. So, it's fun to sit around and do that. But like you said, every season's different. And even, when you return a lot, it's different. Guys buying into different roles. And, I don't know, as a coach, it's almost like when you win it and your team's doing what you asked and they bought in and they're playing hard, they're playing together, it's almost a sense of relief as much as anything. Because, we talk about GTW in 22, I was very confident we had that, that nobody was going to outwork us, that, we were TTW. And it was almost, you preach that, and then when you see it pay off, it was, it's almost as much of a relief as anything. This year, we didn't start out that, and I've said it a bunch, but our community, I don't think expects us to win every game, but for 20, 30 years, they've watched teams that overachieved, that played hard as heck, flew around, made plays, played together, and you could get us out of that. There were times when we looked like that early in the season, but not just consistently. And that kind of goes back to your last question about, it's, what does your worst night look like? Can you win when you don't have your best stuff? Can you grind one out and win an ugly game, whether it's, might even be 46-42 or something, but can you grind one out? That's, that, like, that's what I said is why I'm so proud of this year's group, is because they got to that point. I think in 22, I was more worried about just our talent level and if we had enough to compete with the best teams in the state, especially with starting 2 sophomores at the time, and Yanni and Isaiah. Could they grow up fast enough? And, I had some of the same things this year with having starting a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and only 2 seniors. Could they grow up fast enough? So, but I knew our ceiling was really high this year, but the ceiling and potential, those are dangerous words as a coach. You love them, but you also hate them at the same time, because it means you're not where you can be. And I thought, like I said, later in the season got to playing where we could be, and where, it's almost like a baseball analogy. Like, you talk about a really good starting pitcher, when they don't have a good feel for their fastball or curveball or whatever, they adjust and find a way to keep their team in it and give their offense a chance to win. And that's what I felt about this year's group. When we got to, late February, March, I was like, all right, even if we have a cold night shooting, I think our defense is good enough to keep us around until we hit some shots or something along those lines. And, I'm not a big believer in, that there's off nights shooting, because I always think that you can counter it. Like, all right, if we're cold from 3, what else is the defense giving us? Can we take advantage of that? So finding a solution, this group got a lot better at finding a solution no matter what, type of game we were in.
I think you perfectly described, I forget what game it was. May have been the Marquette game, when afterwards you were like, all right, we're ready. And the reason you said that was because of what you just said. Like, it was kind of ugly. Stuff wasn't going perfect, but they figured it out.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're playing a really good team who's got a dude who can hit tough shots. And, that was something that I think frustrated us early, is when we did our job defensively and played pretty good defense, and, a guard hit a tough shot. And when you got Brody Owen and Zyree and Luke and all these dudes on your schedule, that's going to happen. So you're going to have to learn with it. We've had some great defensive teams at Webster. We never shut anybody out. So you're going to have to learn with that, is just make good guards, make their lives difficult, make them earn everything. Everything's contested. They don't get an easy one. Take away, if they run a set for a back door or a stagger, try to take away their primary actions and make them, score off something that they're not as comfortable on. The Marquette game, we kind of come out cold. Brody got it going there for a while and kind of weathered the storm. And they'd make a run, and we answered. Didn't lose our composure, huddled tight, stay together. And then finally found a pretty good rhythm in the second half offensively. And we were able to force some turnovers and get out in transition. And, so, like you said, we were able to kind of adjust and adapt. And, but they, they were a really good team, because they were doing the same. They had an injury and kind of went small, and wasn't really expecting that from them. So they were kind of spacing it around Brody with more shooting than they normally played with. So, just that adjustment, counter adjustment, that's what a big game looks like. Like, it's not, unfortunately, you don't normally get to come out with your game plan, and that works perfectly for 32 minutes. So, that was one that made me, going into the playoffs, beating a team that had handled us pretty convincingly in December, but also, like you said, the style of the game, that, okay, this is, we're close to where we need to be.
I'm glad you brought up that December game, the Coach vs. Cancer, because it relates back to, I was talking about the outcome bias. Mm-hmm. And so, like, okay, we lost that game, but then when you break it down, I forget exactly how it went, but I think it ended up only being like a quarter or a quarter and a half of them going on a run. That kind of, because was it like neck and neck at halftime?
We were actually up 10.5, had played really good defense the first half. I think we gave up, it was either 12 or 16. So had an elite half defensively. Second half gave up something like 46-48. Like, and that's unreal. Like, you want to talk about points per possession. One of those is dominant, and one of those is a team that gives up 100 a game. Like, it's it was crazy night and day, the difference between the first half and second half. And first half wasn't beautiful offensively, but I thought we did play well defensively. But once they got on a roll, we weren't able to do anything to change it, to get them out of rhythm. Can you force a turnover somehow? Can you get a deflection? And then on the offensive end for that, like, okay, now they're hitting everything. And there was panic for us. Like a lot of, oh crap, they're on a run. I gotta answer. And instead of, we got to get a great shot by, getting ball reversal, breaking them down, multiple paint touches, things like that. It was, okay, I got to go make a play because they're on a run, which is good intent, but it doesn't work out very well in, what I think is the ultimate team sport. So, I think we had guys that recognized like, hey, this is a, critical moment. We need to make a big play, but they try to go Superman on it. And, we tracked, 0 and 1 pass possessions, which is not a bad thing when you're out in transition. When you're in a half court game, it's just hard to break down a good defense like Marquette or Westminster or somebody like that quickly. So we had a lot of 0-1 pass possessions in the second half. And then all of a sudden you don't score and they're out in transition again. And, they're spacing the floor with their shooters, their rim runners are doing what they're supposed to do. And they're hard to stop. So, no, that was just one of those night and day from the first half. And when you look at how, like I said, how we responded in February, it was so much better. And, when you play a really good team, they're going to go on a run. Like the only thing I can guarantee you about a big game is that there's going to be adversity. Like that's what makes it a big game. Like that the other team's not going to just, roll over. That's what good teams do. So yeah, definitely responded a lot better in February than we did in December.
So you mentioned the other team going on a run, and then you also mentioned playing guys like Brody, like Luke, who are going to score and get those maybe those like Steph Curry type buckets where it's 3 points, but it feels like 4 or 5. Yeah. And so then you went on to say the response to that a lot of times was kind of the do it myself stuff. Do you feel like that was a byproduct of, you mentioned the younger roster? Do you feel like it was that, or more so the skill set of those players, if that makes sense?
Probably a little bit of both. I think it took a little bit of time for our guys to gel and develop that trust that championship teams have, that if you send 2, I'm going to make the right play and find the open guy. And, if he's a non-shooter, he's going to cut and be in the right spot, or if he's a shooter, he's going to knock it down and things like that. And obviously, so much of what we did offensively went through Scotty, but even Scotty, we talked about shots that were okay on his being more aggressive on his second touch than his first. So say, for example, you run an early ball screen and they go under, he's a great shooter, shot over 40% from 3. He can knock that down. But if you miss, now nobody else has touched it. They only had to guard for 5 seconds, and we're probably not in rhythm, and the defense, they only had to guard for 5 seconds. That ain't bad, So just even like I said, the trust of he gives it up. Boom, we get into an action. He gets a second touch and is able to create an advantage off that. And if he draws 2, he kicks and et cetera. So, I think our youth. And just, it took us a while to get that trust level that I think great teams have, that, if it's not my night, then so it's going to be somebody else's. Or if they're going to face guard me, okay, well, I'm still going to work. I'm going to move off the ball to get open. But I'm also going to trust that you can't guard my teammate 1v1 with no gap and no help. So we got there. But, yeah, like you said, it took a little longer than I would have liked.
If this year's team played our 16-17 team, who would win? And why is it the 16-17 team?
See, Val, this is the difference is, this is like, almost feels like when I talk to a parent and you're like, okay, we can talk about your son, but they're all my guys. Like they're all my guys. So like we're not, if you want to talk about what your son needs to do for, to earn more clock, I'm welcome to have that conversation, but it's not going to turn into a comparison game because they're all my guys. Like, so that's the same thing. When you think about 16, 17, I think that was just such a phenomenal defensive team. That was, when you talk about Kevin and Cam and Court and Cartier size inside, that, that's what stands out to me, is I felt like that team was never going to be out of a game because of their defense, that they could survive, like we talked about, an off shooting night, things like this. we probably had a little bit more floor spacing this year, but we weren't quite on that same level defensively. So, you talk about, strengths of different teams and trying to adjust to your personnel. Obviously, we were way more 5-out this year than we were back then with Cartier in the middle, and with also more depth at post with you and Stevie. And so it's, you try to adjust to your personnel, and it's kind of funny looking back at like the style you play. And, obviously I think what our biggest strength is that we have an identity, and it's going to be TTW. Man, I don't know if I've ever messed that one up.
It's that fire alarm.
Yeah. I don't know if but you have a culture, and you know what you're all about, and you have an identity. But X's and O's wise, I think at the high school level, you got to be a little flexible. Like in an ideal world, we get up and pressure every single game of every single year and jump ball screens every single time. But, sometimes you don't quite have the personnel, or you're giving up some size or speed or whatever it might be. And you got to adjust.
So that's a good topic that I definitely wanted to touch on was analytics. Mm-hmm. You're a big math guy.
Yep. AP stats.
Yeah. And so, it's 4 letters of your 6 last name. Math and Mathis.
Good math, Mel.
So you talked about, there's a couple different directions. Let's start with this. So you mentioned Scotty, the first touch versus the second touch, points per possession, stuff like that. I've heard other coaches in terms of ranking, because every team has certain shots that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And so I've heard some teams categorize them as gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal, golds at the rim, catch and shoot. You have the 0 to 5 or 1 to 5?
Yeah, 1 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like you said, I think different coaches have different terminology. But, it comes down to, especially in Missouri, without a shot clock, we don't have to take hard shots. It's what it comes down to. And, I think we have, I think what I'm probably most proud of Scotty for this year is 62% from the field. So it's not just the crazy numbers, it's the efficiency that he did it with. And you look around our team, that was a theme, Brady being insane from 3. We had a lot of dudes over 50% field goal percentage, and even more dudes effective field goal percentage over 50% when you start to weight threes. But yeah, that's the tough thing for me in Missouri. No shot clock. You can flip the floor 2, 3, 4 times, and you should be able to get what you want, and not a shot that the defense isn't that mad about allowing. So yeah, for us, we talk about 1 through 5. 5 is going to be a catch and shoot from one of our best shooters that's uncontested. So talking about 4 or 5 feet of space, or at the rim, pretty much uncontested. And then 4, you're talking about 1v1s at the rim from your slashers. You're talking about, instead of 5-6 feet of open space for one of your best shooters, it's closer to 2-3. Or you're talking about, a guy that's, instead of 40% from 3, that might be mid 30, somewhere between 33 and 37%. Threes are the ones that will get you beat. And the reason I say that, on our scale of 1 to 5, not the 3-point shot,
Gotcha.
Threes are the ones that will get you beat, because they're the ones that they're the ones that you can make, and they're not quite bad enough to get the dude benched, but they're not good enough shots that if you take all threes that you're going to win consistently. Or you might win 1, lose 1, win 1, lose 1. Shot selection is a tough one, because you want your guys to play free. You want them to play with confidence, and be aggressive. But it's, like I said, it's under our control, especially with no shot clock. We control what shots we get, assuming that you're able to take care of the basketball. But so threes are the tough ones, because they're the ones that, you might make 40% of the time, and they're not as atrocious as the 1 or 2 where, you're double teamed or highly contested, or you're a non-shooter taking a 3 or something like that gets you benched. 1s and 2s get you benched. 3 doesn't normally get you benched, but when you have a bunch of dudes taking 3s, that's you're just not going to be efficient offensively.
And what's a 3 for you? Or does it just depend on the personnel?
Depends on the personnel. So contested mid-range, I think probably throughout the board.
Shout out to Carl.
Contested mid-range is probably across the board. You're talking about finishing where shoulders aren't going to the rim. So dude's got you walled up pretty good and you're going more like where the ball closet is in Robert's gym, or you're going to the lobby instead of shoulders facing the rim. 3's where you don't quite have your balance. So you're catching off a stagger and it's highly contested and you're still on the move and you got that little bit of fade that makes it really tough for a high school player. So, maybe you called the set for whoever it was coming off the double screen and they got a little bit of space, but if it's not the one where they're catching in rhythm and have space to work with, that's what those are, I think, common traits of 3s: contested mid-range, shoulders not going to the rim, or not having your balance on a jump shot.
And then you said a 4. An example of a 4 was one-on-one at the rim. Does it matter like where the defense is positioned in terms of like in front of him, hip to hip, behind him?
Yeah. So, like when we talk about playing off 1 foot versus 2 feet, we talk about if it's a blow by, you can play off 1. I think everybody, or not everybody, but I think a lot of people preach playing off 2 feet, which is great unless you got the defender beat. Then your goal is to get it up as quick as possible. So we talk about playing off 2 feet when the dude's on your hip, but we think we've repped that enough that that we're good at playing off 2 and that we can be efficient in that situation. So if they're not going to send a second defender and you've got created, at least advantage enough to get them on your hip, we think we can get a good shot and get a 4 out of that. So, that's one that it's a 4. I think the defender can be on your hip and it'd still be a 4 if you've put in the work playing off 2, playing with pace, using ball fakes, things like that. And, we've been fortunate to have some guys that were really patient at that, and just strong. Like, obviously Isaiah and would hit you with 4 ball fakes in there and play off 2. And, rarely did he get out of control off 1. And then I think Carl this year really found that gear of slowing down a little bit and not being in a hurry in the lane and ball fake. But that's possible because he's worked his butt off in the weight room and you're not going to take it from him. Eddie Peplo, second best assist to turnover ratio on our team this year, trailing only Brady. Trailing only Brady. But it's because Eddie was so strong. You weren't going to take it from him. Like it was, if you got in there and draw 2, all right, you might double him and might make the pass difficult, but he's going to pivot. He's going to be strong with it, and not be loose with it. So. And then obviously Scotty, I think one thing that separates him from a lot of really good guards is his strength and, the time he's put in the weight room and, allows him to finish 1v1. Now, most people don't let him play 1v1 very often. So, but no, I think, defender can be on the hip and it still be a 4 if you put in the work on your footwork and things like that.
That's what I've noticed as I've watched a lot of film throughout the years is like, because in the skills training world, it's like, about moves and to blow by your defender and all this stuff. And so then I used to look at it through the lens of like, I'm trying to just like AI on Michael Jordan, shake him out of his boots. But then as I started watching film, it's predominantly hip to hip advantages. Like if you were to tally the amount of hip to hips versus just complete, like shift them, leave them in the dust, I would say it might depend on the level, but for the most part, whether it's like 70-30 hip to hip versus blow by.
Yeah. That, kind of going back to the conversation we had earlier about, one can get you benched and one can't. Like you can, if you're talking about it defensively, if your guy gets downhill, but you angle him out of the paint, that's not the end of the world. What you can't give up are blow bys like you're talking about. And good defensive teams they don't allow that many blow bys. I think that ratio 7-30 is, it might even be 80-20. So yes, do you need to work on your handle? Do you need to have moves? Yes. But more times than not, it's going to be, I don't worry about creating the advantage as much as recognizing that you have space to operate. You got room, you got a double gap where there's, not a gap defender waiting on you so that when you do get downhill, you got enough room to make something happen. Or they gotta, whether it's 1v1 and you're thinking about finishing, or if they send a second defender, can you slow down, play off two, and find the open dude? And so, yeah, I think what kind of the skill that you're talking about there, like seeing the second side is the one that high school guys struggle with so much. So let's say I drive left block and they send the help defender. Can I slow down enough, stride stop, jump stop, pivot, and see that second side? Because the help's going to come from somebody on the right corner in that case, or right slot maybe. And can you find that cutter, that shooter spotted up? So yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Like, don't get me wrong, you need your moves, but it's what you do once you create that little bit of advantage, which happens a lot more than a blow by. Obviously if you drop a guy or something, then great. But yeah, it's more often than not you create a little bit of an advantage. Now, what can you do with it? What I think about with that is after the state title game, I got asked, they were they're blitzing ball screens with Scotty. How did you counter that? And, we did a little bit of, trying to ball screen with guards and put the right defender in the matchup. But also we just ball screened less in the second half because with Scotty, you ball screen to help create an advantage. And he rarely needs help creating an advantage. So what you're more worried about is the spacing once he gets going downhill. Do you have the spacing where if they help one, are they not going to help? Is like, for example, they were in red gap coverage on Brady, and really even red gap coverage or red help coverage is what I would say. Like, they're not at the equator on Brady. They're 2 feet outside the paint on the other side. So can you manipulate the spacing so that when he gets downhill, either there's not going to be a help defender there, or if there is a help defender, then we've got to answer, like whether it's a 45 cut from a slasher, or whether it's a shooter spotted up, et cetera. So that was my answer, was he doesn't often need help creating the advantage. It's can you manipulate the spacing once you have an advantage?
So putting the chess pieces where they need to be based on how the other team's guarding them.
Yes, but also, in the flow of offense, like, let's say that was out of transition. It's not about I think chess pieces. It's about those guys knowing how to handle, okay, who helped from the defense? How do I make myself available, et cetera? So, not only just about getting guys in the right spots, but also that they know how to read, how to counter whatever the defense did. So if let's say they helped aggressively outside the paint, that's going to open up the 45 cut more and make the skipper to the opposite corner tough. So even if I'm a really good shooter, I might have to relocate there. I might have to cut. So spacing, yes, but then also, not just where it's at on the board, but also know how to move, similar to chess.
Okay, so you mentioned effective field goal percentage. Mm-hmm. So let's break it down.
Yeah.
Because I honestly need a little refresher. I know it takes into account that threes are more than two.
Yeah, so it's going to go 1.5 times your threes, because the issue with field goal percentage, and it's kind of crazy. It has its use, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of crazy that it's still like the default when you watch an NBA broadcast or something, because like, let's say Steph shot 45% from 45% field goal percentage on the night, and Jimmy Butler shot 45% from three. Who are you going to bet scored more points that game?
Curry is 45 field goal.
And they're both 45 field goal percent.
Oh, Curry for sure.
Yeah, because he probably hit, he probably took more threes than Butler did, et cetera. So by weighting that three, but 1.5, the fact that it's worth more, it gives shooters a better chance. And especially in today's game when there's so many guys that take more threes than twos. But yeah, I'd rather have somebody who takes a lot of threes and their field goal percentage is 45 than somebody who takes nothing but twos and their field goal percentage is 50%. The 45% field goal percentage is actually scoring more points for you. So that's where effective field goal percentage allows you to compare apples to apples, and you don't have this apples to oranges comparison.
That, what you just said, is why the analytics stuff is so interesting to me, because it's a number and you see it on a spreadsheet or an ESPN graphic or whatever. And it's real easy to like, okay, these are the facts. This is what it is. Yep. But then you dig deeper, because then even like, okay, so effective field goal percentage takes into account threes. Mm-hmm. But then there's levels to that, because Shane Battier, the threes he's taken versus Steph. Mm-hmm. Steph's more off the dribble, balance shift, momentum shifting left, right. Battier is kind of more stationary. So even that, there's levels to it.
Oh, no doubt. And that's where, we're fortunate that high school is starting to catch up with some of that stuff. Like if you go into Synergy for, your college and your NBA, they're going to break it down into what % of our shots were highly contested, less than 2 feet of space, and then, medium contests, 4 or 3 or 4 feet, to no contest, 5 feet or more with space. And, I might be wrong on how many feet they break it down. And we're starting to get that synergy starting in the high school game, which I think is going to force Huddle to up their game. They've kind of had a monopoly on it for several years now, since Crossover had a little run. They were a video film. That's going back to like your playing days, which has been a hot minute. So,
I don't even remember Crossover.
Yeah,
might be before me.
Yeah, might be. You can look at, okay, well, he shot 40% from 3, but he's only taken uncontested threes. Not a bad player by any means. Then you talk about somebody, like a Steph, or somebody who's, defenses just don't allow him to get uncontested, that he's almost always going to have when you lock and trail everything, or jump ball screens, or whatever the case is. He shoots 40% and half his attempts are highly contested. Well, that's the difference between a good shooter and a unbelievable shooter. And, that was we're starting to get there in high school, where I think we'll have access to more of that stuff. Brady's a perfect example. Like, I didn't want Brady to shoot 48% from 3 this year. It was, I wanted him taking more difficult shots. And, but he was very particular about the threes he got when he had time and space. And I think he got more aggressive with it as the season went along. But yeah, if you've got a guy that good, that 48%, I'd almost rather them to be taking more medium contest threes and shoot 44%. Like that's kind of what you're getting at there. So, effective field goal percentage is useful for us. I like points for possession, just because, especially in the high school game, 32 minutes, and we play at a variety of different paces. Like I said, again, no shot clock, so you can play Westminster or somebody, Eureka, and they want to control the tempo and really turn it into a slugfest. And so at the end of the day, you might score 50 and you're like, man, we were really bad offensively, but you look at your points per possession and you're at 1.1 or something. You're like, okay, well, that's a pretty respectable number. Whereas a different game was with a lot of pace, other team took quick shots, you're going up and down, it's a track meet, and you're like, oh, well, we scored 70, shouldn't that be pretty good? And you look at it and you're right at 1 or under 1, and that's pretty average or below average. So I like points per possession because it's able to kind of block out the pace of the game. And that's, and I like, tracking the pace too, especially. Now this year, I think we were a little more adaptable. We didn't press as much, but like when you got a pressing team, can you force 70, 80 possessions in a game instead of 60? And, Houston was huge on that this year in college basketball. I think their goal was be plus 20 in field goal attempts between offensive rebounds and forcing turnovers. And so they're getting a shot because they forced a turnover and offensive rebounds that, okay, we may not be the best shooting team in the world, but if we take 20 more shots than you, we're probably going to beat you. So I know that was their goal every game, 20 more field goal attempts. And they're not wrong. It's hard to lose when, we take 70 shots and you take 50.
It's cool to see as a Fontbonne alumni in the same conference as Greenville. Yeah. And then even Grenell, shout out to Brady.
Yeah.
Like at one point, at least to me, they were like super like, whoa, crazy, whoa. Yeah. But then as the years go on, I feel like a lot of teams have kind of shifted towards that sort of philosophy, just in terms of like, we need X amount of threes, X amount of whatever to win the game. And that fast pace too.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously I think Grenell's the original at it, and they've calmed down a little bit, still playing with a lot of pace and shooting a ton of threes. Greenville probably more, what Grenell calls the system, Greenville probably more into it nowadays than Grenell is. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Like when I struggle with trying to, in a particular game, knowing exactly what your breakdown is going to be of threes to, twos to paint, et cetera. We're talking about a lot of analytics, but I'm not anti mid-range at all. So, if they're going to play drop coverage because they really respect, your lob threat, if you take those 2 extra dribbles, you can have a lot of uncontested mid-ranges. And I think good guards can hit an uncontested mid-range at a high enough clip to make it worth it. Now, that's, like I said, uncontested, where you're stepping into it, you're in rhythm, you don't have a hand in your face, things like that. So, and that to me is, and I think just late game, teams are going to protect the paint. They're not going to lose shooters. I think how many games late do you see decided by a big mid-range? And that, you want to get into the numbers there of, so let's say, we're down 1, 15 seconds left, we got the ball, we're trying to get a bucket. So you just need a bucket. Like, a bucket will win it. And so maybe you're 45% from mid-range and you're 40% from three. Both of those pretty good numbers. Well, if one bucket completely changes the outcome of the game, then I like 45% better than 40%. Like, so I think especially late in game, and, hopefully we'll have the shot clock before too long, I think the mid-range definitely still has its use. But what I started to get at was I struggle, like, we went out to Pittsburgh, Kansas, and they saw a couple teams that really packed the paint on us, and just kind of basically said we were going to have to beat them from the 3-point line. So in 2 games, we had taken like 78 threes, which was a lot.
You said 2 games?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a big number. And so we talked about that being higher than what we wanted it to be. But also, like, if they're going to have 4 bodies in the paint every time you get a paint touch, you're going to take, like, you need to take more. Like, if the defense is going to sell out on taking away this, it's got to open up something else. And if you're not taking advantage of what it opens up, then you're kind of, I don't know, you're playing with 4 dudes in the paint. It looks more like rugby than basketball. Similarly, if somebody's going to be worried about your shooting and, not be aggressive out of gaps and helps, then you got to be able to win 1v1s. And you might take, we had games where we took 8 threes because, worried about our shooters, and we had, a lot of guys that shot over 40%. So if they want to play you that way defensively, all right, what are they trying to take away? What's the counter? Can we beat them with that counter? It goes back old as time, but if somebody's zoning you, probably, unless they're trying to force turnovers, probably trying to protect the paint. And if they're going to have 4 or 5 bodies in the paint, like, the best answer is to be able to knock it down from distance. So, I think that's good. Teams find a solution, but we had games where we took 8 threes and games where we took 38. And I don't know. I don't hate that. I don't think there's a magic number. I know Boston is big into it and their offense is really pretty, but, so I'm not saying they're wrong, but I think especially at the high school level, it's where you see probably more drastic game plans than, I think teams are more willing to go to the extreme at the high school level than what you see at, high levels. In the NBA, you're okay. Maybe he's not that, he's only 40%. So we're going to make him beat us. Or in high school, that could be a dude who had Taco Bell and was more worried about their geometry tests. So
yes,
yeah, you probably don't see it to the extremes in the NBA, which is why it allows the numbers to be a little more stable. But, yeah, in high school, I struggle to be like, oh, we have to shoot X amount of threes, et cetera.
Yeah, there's definitely more room for error in high school. So you mentioned points per possession. That's like, so you shoot a 3-pointer, that's worth 3. And then it's like the percentage that you shoot on that percentage divided by 3 or something like that.
So it's just going to be your total possession points. So it'd be total points in the game divided by possessions. So generally, so like, let's say You come out in the first 4 possessions of the game, you score 3 of them. You score 3 different times. Let's say they're all 2s. So you're at 6 divided by 8. You're a little bit under a point per possession. And if you can get to, if you're over 1, if you can get over 1.1, you're pretty efficient offensively. I mean, you think about shooting that, like if you're at 1 and you're a team that doesn't turn it over, gets some offensive rebounds, that's, basically shooting 50% from the field, which is, pretty good. So, that's one I like, just because you can play some low possession games in high school, and it allows you to evaluate your offense a little bit more outside of the pace of the game. The other one that I like on a more individual basis is a VPS, value point system. And all it is like a ratio. So in your numerator, you got all the good stuff you do, points, assists, steals, and the denominator, you got all the bad stuff, misses, fouls, turnovers, etc. So if you got more good than bad, you're over 1. If you got more bad than good, you're under 1. And what I like about it is that it's not as dependent on minutes. So it's one I like when I'm evaluating on bench guys and their effectiveness, because if you go in and you get, 4 rebounds and 1 bucket, and you didn't have any turnovers, and you missed 1 shot, you're going to have a good VPS. So it gives those guys who played less minutes a chance. It gives them an analytic or a stat that they can compete with starters in, if they're being efficient. And the other thing I like about it is it's not just a shooting stat, not just a ball handling stat like assist to turnover. It tries to cover, like, it's got field goal attempts, it's got rebounds, things like that. So it's pretty comprehensive. So like I said, VPS over 1 means you're doing more good than bad. The top's bigger than the bottom. If you start approaching like 1.5 and 2, you're really cooking. And in a 1 game, a bench guy can come off and score 4 points, grab 2 rebounds, and they didn't make any mistakes, and they can have a super high one. But as you go over the course of the season, I like it. It balances out, and I like it for evaluating because it's not dependent on minutes, since it's a ratio.
That's the first time I've heard of that.
Yeah, that's a good one to look into.
Are you a plus minus guy?
I'm a plus minus guy for the season, not necessarily for a game. Normally, if you lose and you look at your plus minus, your starters are not going to be very good. But I like it over the season, and I will say, the nice thing about Huddle is it allows you to look at different lineups. So you see, maybe a lineup that you didn't expect, all of a sudden their plus minus is pretty good. Or you can look at like, okay, we think this is our best defensive lineup when we've played these guys together. What does it look like? Or this is our best shooting lineup. What does the plus minus look like on that? So, I think it can ebb and flow in a game, and in a game, I don't necessarily always love it, but over the course of a season, like, you see guys, I mentioned it at our banquet, but we were plus 300 with Brady on the floor this year. And I mean, it's, which, that's a pretty high number for a team that won a lot of close games like we did. And that was, keeping an eye on that number is one of those where kind of came to the realization as the season went along. Like, there were times when, if the other team didn't have a 5 and Brady was guarding the perimeter, X's and O's wise, you can justify, like, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Hasn't got a whole lot of looks from 3, and, he's having to guard on the perimeter more. There's not a big, there's times where you can justify, like, oh, we might just be better off going with 5 guards. But I think he was just so much of the heart and soul of our team, got us organized offensively, controlled the glass, that as I, watched that number throughout the year, I'm like, okay, even in matchups that don't necessarily make sense or they're not ideal for him, his plus minus is still positive. Like, this dude still needs to be out there. And so that's one way I think you can use it.
So, hey, Houston, can you come in here?
You said where?
Can you just fill it up and then bring it back in here? Okay. First time that's happened on the podcast. Okay, so this was a question I wanted to make sure to ask was I knew that you probably didn't have access to as much data as NBA or college teams.
Yep.
But it sounds like you might have some soon.
Yeah, I think it's trending the right way at the high school level. And it's so much of it's automated now. Thank you, Mark.
Shout out to Houston. Yay.
So much of it's automated and stuff that it's getting easier to get that for everybody. But
so how do you go about communicating the numbers to players? Because are you like filtering some out? Are you giving them everything that you have access to?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say, we do a ton, I don't think, Brady knows his VPS or Scotty knows, how many points per possession we're at, if you ask him in the third quarter of a big game. And I don't think you need them knowing that, you want those guys playing, you just want them playing. And, so yeah, normally when we identify a problem is normally when we go to it. So, like I said, we tracked our number of passes per possession, which is an interesting one in the NBA because, some of the teams that pass the most aren't, your winning teams. But when you look at, 0-1, 0-1, 2-1, like it's not hard to see that, okay, that's not going to be great offense. We showed the guys, I put it up and they're like, oh, that's how many passes we had each possession. Then you go watch the film and you're like, okay, yeah, that wasn't very good offense. But I did, as the season went along, is when you see improvement. I think you try to show it. Like for us, probably took a few too mid ranges early in the season, and we looked at we were going from like 11, 12 a game to 5, 6 a game, and how our offense improved and how our field goal percentage was up, our points per game was up. So I don't know. I think you definitely want to mix in the good and the bad. It's a way to show progress. It's a way to show progress. Like I said, a couple times I mentioned Eddie's plus or minus, and it can show things that don't show up in the box score. And I think it's so big to recognize those things and make sure they're valued in your locker room. I go back to the end of the Westminster game, the first time we played them.
That was Coaches versus Cancer?
Yeah, Coaches versus Cancer, day after Marquette. And I think Pablo got a chest stop, forced a tough level 2 on one end, got the rebound. We come down. He tips an offensive rebound to keep us the basketball. We got a baseline out. He sets a great screen for Q and gets him open. And, I remember the exact line from the film session was like, I said it. You guys were about to watch an Eddie Peplo takeover, and I used that word just in the third quarter. Scotty got going, and he scored 8 or something in a row, and I said, "You're taking over the game right now." And but anyway, that stretch, Eddie took over the game, and I think of the exact words I said was, I don't know if I can get you in the headline of a mixtape, but I said I promise you that this locker room values that, and that anytime we're gonna recognize this, and we're gonna et cetera. So I think that's one way you can use it is guys that don't necessarily have the traditional stat line that's going to get them a lot of love. You can show that like, hey, you scored 2 points last night, but we were plus 12 with you on the floor. That's awesome. Good and bad. And it's another way to recognize dudes that are doing the little things that maybe don't show up in just points and et cetera.
Man, we need to normalize. Let's get a mixtape of offensive rebounds, charges, diving on the floor. Let's normalize that. Let's make that cool.
100%. Especially because I think the mixtape, it used to be if you had a mixtape, it was a big deal. Now everybody, their grandma has one, so it doesn't have hardly any weight. And, even when I talk to guys about if they're trying to put together a highlight reel for college, no, they don't want to watch 5 minutes straight of you playing defense, but you mix in some passing, mix in, a couple charges, try to show a complete game because, I don't know, pretty much anybody can make a highlight reel that looks pretty good, but can you show that you're well-rounded, that you're doing those things? Because yeah, like you said, it's undervalued, and I don't know if it might be trending the wrong way too. It's just like how many dudes watch just highlights and not full games. did you watch the game or did you watch the the highlight reel? And that's tough.
That goes back to what I was saying about the hip to hip advantages, is because like I would see a clip of Kyrie yanking somebody, and then I'm thinking, okay, that's how you get buckets. But then if I were to go back and watch his other 10 field goals that he made that game, it's catch and shoot, one dribble, get to the rim, stuff like that. I had Sam Briscoe on here for he was one of the first ones.
Yep.
But we were talking about like, all right, if the first 30 seconds of your mixtape is you tying shoes and layup lines, that might be a red flag.
Yeah, that's probably not the best sign.
So you mentioned, and as an example, saying to a player, it may not show up like on a mixtape, but you were plus 12 tonight. Great job, that type of thing. So is there ever any explaining, like plus minus, for example, like, okay, you were plus 12, great job, but have you ever had to like explain to someone what that means or why that's important?
Yeah, for sure. And pretty much every year, like you want to break down like effective field goal percentage, points per possession, even just try to show them like the difference in how many field goal attempts we have in a game. Like if you have a game where you don't take care of the basketball and it's at a slow pace, like guys, we took 40 shots. If we made every one, we might have scored 80 points. Like that's nobody, like you don't like your numbers. Nobody's going to like their numbers if we don't take care of the basketball and we don't, play with a little more pace and get more than 40 field goal attempts. But no, yeah, I think you definitely got to explain that. And you don't want to, and you stick to some of the ones that are like in that nice middle ground where it's not, like I don't talk a ton about VPS with the guys or plus minus with different lineups. Like that's more for me as a coach, when evaluating things like playing time and, how effective the game plan was. But, these guys, we're fortunate to have, guys that are so passionate about basketball and around the game so much that like plus minus or effective field goal percentage or points per possession, I think you can, I think one, they probably know it, but as a coach, you never want to assume they know. They probably know it as a dangerous area as a coach. They probably know the game plan. They probably know he's a shooter. That's a bad place to be. So no, you can still explain those and do it pretty quickly and do it in a way that like I said, recognizes guys that are playing the game the right way and without spending too much time on it and trying to make it feel it shouldn't feel like math class. That's I'll use that line, sometimes like, you scout like crazy and you have a game plan, but there are times when I say, guys, this isn't a chemistry quiz. If we win the glass, we'll win the game. Like, and it's that simple sometimes.
All right. So let's take it back to Helias High School.
All right.
Okay. You've got to help me out because I've been trying to figure out for the longest what type of player you were.
Pass first, second, and take 20-something charges.
Okay, I was about to say, because I had a couple pieces of evidence. One was you took like 26, I think it was, charges your senior year.
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark.
And then I remember you telling the story about your senior night, how like at the ceremony before the game, you were saying your favorite memory was beating the team you're about to play. So that gives off like Draymond Green. Were you like talking trash, taking charges? Like, what was it? Facilitator?
Nah, I didn't have, I'm not sure. Who would you put in Draymond's level of craziness? I mean, maybe you can go back to Ron Artest, maybe Brooks, but like, I don't know. Like, I can't name more than 5 dudes that are in his level of wildness, I would say. But
no, he's a different breed for sure.
No, I was more the, like I said, past first point guard. I was fortunate to be on a really good team. We had some pretty big time players, a lot of dudes that went on to play in college. One of my best friends is Zach Rockers, who was an assistant. He still coaches at Helias, but he was an assistant on the team we beat in 2022, and that was a weird.
I remember that
weird dynamic for me. We were up texting at 2 a.m. and then I got the last text to him the night before the game at 4 a.m. just so he knew. I just want to make sure he knew that I had stayed up watching film a little bit later than him. But, he went on to be an All-American at Columbia College, played there. Danny Feldman, our big guy, went Ivy League and actually transferred back to Mizzou. So, definitely was not much of a scoring threat, but a decent passer. And then, just a guy that probably guarded players that they shouldn't have been able to with my athleticism, but just by having a little bit of a mean streak, a little bit of a nasty, being a pest, being that, anytime you got a chance to bump, make contact, I did. And then, like you said, probably the one elite skill I had was taking charges. So, I don't know, the overall a pretty average player, but you talk about, teams taking on the character of your coach. And I've been fortunate to, have teams that were a lot more talented than I was a player, but then also had kind of my identity of having a little bit of a nastiness and toughness and those type of things.
I guess pest was the word I was looking for.
I think that's probably a better descriptor than the
Draymond Green. So then at what point, so like 4 years there and then go off to college to get your teaching certifications. At what point did the idea of coaching enter the picture for you?
Probably while I was still in the crib, because my dad coached, my grandpa coached before me. Now, if there was going to be a debate for me, it might have been sport, because dad coached basketball for years, but was probably slightly bigger on the baseball side. And, obviously that was back in the days when coaches, you'd coach a fall sport, winter sport, spring sport. Wasn't that unusual. But he actually probably had his best teams on the baseball side. But, I think I knew this is what I wanted to do for, a long time. And, I wasn't one who, I wasn't pre-med freshman, sophomore year and then switched to education. I was education major all 4 years. So I get to SLU and, there's you're trying to stay, I just love the game and try to stay involved. And, my freshman year, we probably played in more 3-on-3 tournaments. And then anybody in St. Louis, and we'd always run into this group of WashU guys and that was in WashU's heyday. They're coming off 2 Final Four appearances. And so we'd always make the finals and lose to these WashU guys that were dogs. But then later at SLU, just doing that stuff and played in every intramural and rec league, et cetera, it wasn't enough to satisfy the itch for me. I missed it a ton. So became a practice player at SLU. Got to work in season. We worked mainly with the women's team. Got to play some defense in the fall. That was back when the rules were a little bit different. So you couldn't have your whole team as guys. You were limited to small groups. So it was kind of valuable to have an extra body to guard or something like that. A lot of defense. But the in season, we worked more with the girls as the scout team, and as somebody who wanted to get into coaching, that was a really valuable experience because 1 week you might be learning VCU's press, and then the next week you're playing pack line. So I got to see a lot of different styles. Obviously saw some sets and stuff that I took away, but you got to learn quickly, but you got to learn a lot of different systems. So as somebody that wanted to get into coaching, that was valuable. And then I was actually telling this story this year to a soccer player who tore ACL this week. But my senior year, SLU's got a new staff, and I think I might want to try to get a GA or see if I can go that route. And I tear my ACL my senior year, and so I'm not able to be a practice player. Don't get to know the new coaching staff quite as well as I knew the old one. And so I chose my student teaching based on basketball, and I knew I wanted to go to a public school and somebody that had good basketball tradition. But so I chose Webster for student teaching because of basketball, but didn't know anybody. I remember being at the state title game in 2008 and just watching, and I remember Drew got ripped like the first possession of the game, and that going into that game, you'd heard more about McClure North. They had the 3 D1 dudes, and I'm like, oh man, if this team doesn't have a point guard, they're in trouble. Well, they had a point guard. 32 or something later on one ankle. Drew, okay, yeah, they're gonna be okay. But chose Webster, based on the basketball tradition, and was fortunate to work under some great coaches and learn. And like I said, I grew up in the gym every day with my dad. Like I walked from my elementary school to his practice. So, just been very fortunate to have great mentors from Dad to Blossom to Cup. But yeah, I was around a lot of great coaches and, kind of my early years. And, I just can't be, I don't think, grateful enough for that. And, it's why I like doing, stuff like this or anything you can do to help somebody, who wants to break into this profession. It's not easy. It ain't easy. So anything you can do to help somebody along the way, I love it because I had a lot of help.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've noticed that talking to different coaches and trainers, like they're very open, happy to help, stuff like that. So you mentioned Blossom and Stallcup, my guys. What would you say you've learned being their assistant, and or things that you've like taken with you now that you're a head coach?
Yeah. So, I think with Blossom, it starts with two things. One, it was always about the kids. Like, for example, the team photo at the beginning of the year, second week after tryouts, second week of practice, team photo, like Jay would never get in. And he was always like, well, it's their team, not mine. And, it was never about, him getting attention or anything like that. It was always just about the kids. And it's like I said, when you win state, you've made it that far. You got a group that you're incredibly proud of, that's bought in, that that you're that you love, and it's almost as much of a relief that all their hard work paid off. And it's every time it's different because it's a different group of dudes. And so like you go back to 22, and it was that Matt. I just knew how hard he worked. I thought he deserved one, and Ethan, and same thing. You just felt like they deserved it. And so it's a sense of relief. And, same thing going this year with Brady and Carl and how much Scotty had grown up, and Miles, and, Q going through a roller coaster year. Like like that's the word I use, is relief. But, so it's, you're just happy for your guys. And so I think some of that comes from Blossom, because he just keeps it about the kids, which is, in an era where people are in this for different reasons. And, I think that stands out. I'll put it that way. And then I think the other thing that starts with Blossom is just the intensity. And when he walks in between the lines, he's a different dude, and just the intensity and passion never wavers. It's a cliche, but they say, the three people that can't have a bad practice are your coach, your best player, and your point guard. And then, this year, early in the season, I told Scotty, I said, you're two of the three. So that you're the point guard and the best player. So it really holds true. And, I told the guys that, like, that I think that's what I pride myself on. I think that's what Jay does better than anybody is, he never lacks intensity. There's only one speed in practice, and it's going to be intense. It's going to be, once you playing with great urgency, and so I think that's his greatest strength as a coach. And I think I knew how important that was, being around my dad, who was similar, but Jay kind of manifests it in a different way, we'll say. So, but yeah, that's you can't have a bad day as a coach where you don't have energy. And I wish Coach Gates was in the building today, and I wish I could look as cool as he does on the sideline. Like and what's so impressive about that is I think Mizzou plays as hard as anybody, and they're flying around and they're making plays and they're aggressive, and they do it with him, looking very calm and stoic over there. And that's intentional on his part. And he does a ton into, psychology and that kind of stuff. And even just talking about, like, he feels like when he yells, sometimes it's as much of a distraction. And when you get into brain science, and, he phrased it really well once when I heard him speak about, like, think about a kid in your classroom and, somebody comes on the PA. How long does it take them to, regain focus? I'm like, oh, yeah. I don't want to be the PA, but anyway, the point there is just that I wish I could do that, but I'm more of you got to give energy to get energy type of coach. And so, if I'm intense and, and fired up, I think, you hope it trickles down to your guys, especially when you're trying to set the tone. Like, I like to think that I look calmer in the playoffs because, we've had 85 practices. If you don't know it by now, or if you're not playing hard by now, you're probably there. I don't think there's a magic switch where you're going to start doing that in the playoffs. So I like to think I calm down a little bit as the year goes along once you have that foundation set of how hard you play, or at least in games. I mean, not in practice, but so that's I don't know. I think that's the two things that have made Jay a Hall of Fame coach is he's kept it about the kids, and when he walks in between the lines, he's going to have great intensity. And it doesn't matter if it's the third practice of the year, the 50th practice of the year, walk through, coaching girls at Snow Valley. It doesn't matter. I mean, he's got a passion for the game, and it shows every time he steps in between the lines. With Coach Stallcup, another dude who's great at building relationships with his guys, just like Jay is. But it's, to me, what separates Cup is the attention to detail and his ability. The term that kids use now is locked in. Cup is always locked in. Like when you go watch him, when he's scouting a game, there isn't a thing that he doesn't notice. So his ability to maintain focus and attention to detail. And the other thing I think I learned from him is, as a coach, you don't need to teach your players everything you know. Like when Cup's getting ready for a scout, if he tried to teach the guys everything he knew about the upcoming opponent, it would take hours upon hours, because he's gone that in depth. So teach the guys what they need to know to do their jobs, and then you have that information in the back of your mind. Like, you as a coach, you can never know too much. Like, even if I'm not going to go over, like, hey, they were down 1 yesterday and they bust out this one sideline out of bounds with 3 seconds left. On the priority list of the scout, that's not as important as knowing, their best player strengths and weaknesses, who you can help off of. This is their 2 sets they normally run. Like, that one special team play, if you only got 1 day to get ready, you might not, use. So I thought Cup did a unbelievable job of knowing how much to teach the guys and then keeping some of it for yourself. And, you can never know too much as a coach going in. So, yeah, they're Hall of Famers for a reason. And, and also just unbelievable people. And like you said, guys that have given so much to the game, they're willing to give back and just care so much about their dudes. And that's what, people talk about, is the system the same or not? I hope how much, our players, how much they know how much we care. Hopefully that's something that's stayed consistent throughout the transition from Blossom to me.
Yeah. So that transition, was there, I don't know, because you're they're, like you said, Hall of Fame coaches, lots of success. Was there maybe a pressure to keep that going, or like you said, keep things the same? Or what was that process like?
Yeah,
I heard you brought a fat binder to your interview.
So yeah, we can, the psychology of that and just the, let's start with getting the job. So yeah, I'm 28. Now I've been an assistant at Webster for 7 years, and that's 7 years. That's a normal time to move up. Whether you're talking about the business world or basketball, people don't normally stay at the same position for much longer than that. So, I thought I was ready. And, when I was super young, in college and first getting into it, I felt like I wanted to be the youngest head coach in the state. And then you get around a great coach like Blossom and you see how much they do, and you realize how much you have to learn. And, it was definitely, I'm glad I got 7 years as an assistant. I don't know if I would have been ready before then. But yeah, but I'm still a 28-year-old with no head coaching experience trying to take over a blue blood program. And so, like you mentioned, the binder, I was just we had an interview with a community panel and the AD. You're trying to show them that you're over prepared and that you have a plan, and yet, you're not too young or too inexperienced for this. That, yes, there'll be a couple growing pains, but that you've thought this through. What you want your feeder program to look like. How you want to divide your responsibilities for your coaching staff. What you want your camps to look like, things like that. So, when your resume is not quite as bare as mine was when I was 28, maybe you don't have to be quite that prepared, but I had to show them that I was organized and prepared. So, you get the job, and all you have to do is replace a senior class that had scored like 94% of our points or something the year before as we won. How many did we win your senior year?
I think we only lost 3 times.
Yeah. So I'd won about 26 games. So, and then, I remember the district game, I remember your district game that like the seniors had scored, I think every point against Chaminade, or it was either Chaminade or McClure North that I remember senior had scored every point. So, there was expectation, but there was also, I think, a lot of, they hired who? First off, is nobody knew who I was, which is totally okay. So I think that was part of it. And then also we were just replacing, a great senior class that had kind of carried us the year before. So we had some pieces, and, I can't say enough good things about Traquan Connors and Jacoby Banks, that first year being our seniors. And, as you try to keep, I always said that I was the caretaker of a culture. Like, we didn't have to win every game, but as long as our teams played as hard as people were used to seeing, and they played together and they were tough, like that's, what I think people are used to seeing that's what they associated Webster basketball with. And that's what I wanted them to continue to think of. Like, if you say Webster, oh man, those dudes are tough. Like, man, they get after it. Like, and I think, that first class of seniors did a great job of maintaining that. And obviously, behind them, you got Ant and RJ and Luke Moppin and, some guys that had great careers and, won conference championships and won 20 games. Unfortunately for them, COVID was a huge part of their story. So, that was, the one COVID year where we played, we got quarantined, I think 3 times, which is like 6 weeks. And, it's tough to have much of a chance when you miss that much practice. And so, it kind of sets you up for the Matt and Ethan team. And, guys just continued to embody what we wanted our culture to be about. And so that was the one that, I knew going into that year we were going to be good. And I don't think other people probably looked at us quite as highly. I don't know if we were, no idea what the heck our preseason ranking was, but probably wasn't super high. And come out early on, and we're playing Father Tolton with the Porters, an incredibly talented team, and lose in overtime, but a great game. And then we beat a Staley team in the Webster Classic Championship, and another great game. And they've got dudes that have Iowa State, North Carolina now, where they've gone on. So I think early on, then you win Coaches vs. Cancer, kind of send a statement like, hey, this is a Webster team that's not just tough, but also as good as anybody in St. Louis. And, fortunately we've been able to maintain that. But, like I said, the caretaker of a culture, can our teams play as hard as what people are used to saying? Are they going to associate the same words with Webster? And, just been fortunate that we've been able to string together classes that's been as important to them as it is to me. And that, that goes a long way.
How would you say, first of all, I forgot that COVID was your second year coaching, head coach.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been my second year.
So that's tough.
Yeah. In a way, it almost helped me get away from doing things just because that's the way we've always done them. Like, you had to adjust on the fly. Like, all of a sudden you're running Zoom workouts, working on ball handling on porches and things like that. So, you can't just flip the script from last year and do the same thing. Like, you had to improvise on the fly. And, we came up with a shooting challenge where, Apple had an app for free, same one they have now that'll track your makes and things like that. And we drafted teams and did a shooting challenge and things like that. But you had to forge a new path there. And so I think in a sense, it almost helped me with, thinking about like, okay, well, we can't do what we've always done. So what do we need to do? And, prioritize things. But, I just feel for so many dudes who didn't get a, traditional season there. Like, I thought we were going to have a really good team, and we did have a good year, but they never got to play in front of a packed house in front of Kirkwood or really celebrate senior night in front of a full Roberts. And I think as much as anybody because you were on a team that played a national schedule and got to play in some really cool events, and those things are awesome. And, hopefully think we're going to have some pretty fun opportunities next year. No spoilers, so don't even ask Mal.
Hint, hint, hint.
But I think we're going to have an opportunity to do that. But Jay came back for one more year because he wanted to play on Friday night at Roberts. People going crazy in the semifinals of the Webster Classic. And I think so much of that's what they missed out on, so much what makes high school basketball special. And I think you probably know that better than most, having seen both, playing in big time events is awesome, but also there ain't nothing like a Friday night at Roberts, or, trying to go into Kirkwood or whoever and beat them at their place.
I was just going to say, those were probably my favorite games, was at Kirkwood my senior year and Chaminade at home.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and yeah.
And CBC.
Yeah, packed houses, great crowds. That's what I say. I'm just fortunate to coach in a community that cares so much, and that people come out and support, and especially in a big city. It's almost like we got a small town vibe in a big city. So that's awesome, and I think that's something that is always interesting when you talk about guys going on to college, and especially guys that aren't going D1. There's an adjustment period for a lot of those guys, and it's something that I always try to make sure they're aware of, that there may not be as many people at your first college game as there were at the district championship. And, that's one, because, you're fortunate to have a great high school career and play in a blue blood program and where people care, and in a great basketball town in general in St. Louis. I think that's something kids struggle with. It's basketball being played at an incredibly high level, no matter what level you're talking about in college, whether it's NAI, D3, D2, D1. But, the investment you get isn't always the same as what we get from our community.
Yeah. That was a big adjustment for me, for sure. What would you say, or how would you say your coaching philosophy, style, beliefs have evolved from, even first year JV head coach to where they are now?
Yeah, it's, I think probably the biggest difference is when I was younger, I wanted to blame everything on a lack of effort, and, we weren't tough enough, or et cetera. And I think most of the times when we lose, that's just still the problem. But there are times when I've had to stop and think okay, I thought we played soft last night, but we only gave up 2 offensive rebounds, so-and-so, okay, really the issue is we had 14 turnovers. We didn't take care of the basketball, and we didn't take care of the basketball because, we played off 1 foot too much, or we got sped up, or we had bad spacing. And so it's being able to combine that emphasis on toughness and playing hard and we're going to outwork them, but also understanding that, you have to be efficient offensively. You have to be strategic defensively in what you want to allow and the types of shots that you'll live with, and, who's taking them and from where. And so it's finding that balance of emphasizing how hard we're going to play while also trying to combine it with high-level X's and O's. And I think probably too often when I was younger, it was the default was to blame it on effort, and that is often the case. Don't get me wrong, but there are times when you need to look more at skill and X's and O's than that.
It's funny you say that, because I have a very vivid memory of my freshman year. We were practicing, and then I think Ethan Cooley had turned it over or something, and then you had stopped practice, and we're talking about you can't coach effort. And that was the first time I ever heard that phrase. And I was like, it stuck with me, because it was damn, he's right.
Am I though? Because I feel like I spend a lot of time doing it. I don't know. I feel like that's one of those things you say that you hope is true, but the best coaches, you look at a Kelvin Sampson, his teams almost always play harder than anybody they're playing. So either he is just incredibly lucky and his teams play harder, or he's coaching effort on a daily basis and doing it better than almost anybody. And that's why he's a Hall of Famer. And so I don't know if I probably said it, but as a coach, and you hope you don't have to do that, because you hope you have dudes that are, going balls to the walls and, I guess intrinsically motivated and, who want to come in and play hard right away. But I don't know if there's ever been a team where I didn't feel like I could get them to play harder and find another gear that maybe they didn't even know they had. And so, yeah, that's I don't know. It sounds good to say, but I feel like I have spent a good portion of my life coaching effort. So I don't know how much I believe it anymore.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I've thought about that recently. Is like, as a coach or trainer, we are able to like, sometimes we have the key that kind of unlocks their psychology. Mm-hmm. So like maybe it's not effort, it's their girl broke up with them or whatever. And so like showing them that you care for them as a person, or however that manifests. Mm-hmm. But that's a good point, because I do think we have like the key we can turn sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And, that's just where, building relationships is so important. Like, I don't know, people, come to a game and see me on the sideline and very animated and back and forth and yelling, and, they think I'm crazy, but they don't see the relationship building behind the scenes, like where which is why, my guys and our guys have, allow us to coach them hard, is because they know that, I hope they know that I got their back, when it matters. And I'm not mad at him because I don't like him, but I'm mad at him because he didn't go rebound the way he should have. Like, and so, if you have that relationship, you have that foundation, I think it allow you to coach them harder. And when that happens, and when you start coaching them harder, then like you said, sometimes they unlock a level or a gear that, that maybe they didn't even know they had. I just think that's like the way what people see on the sidelines at Webster Groves High School on a Tuesday night. Like, I couldn't go in to a group of dudes that I've been working with for 2 or 3 days and have that same approach, like, because I don't have the same relationship and the same foundation that I have with my guys that I've, put in the hours and, to get to know them, and, in the off season and practices, and a lot of people, will say you have to have the relationship first. And I'm not always a huge believer in that, just because, like, okay, me and a 15-year-old kid, I grew up in Jeff City. They might have grown up in, inner city St. Louis. Basketball that's what we have in common. So the relationship builds through basketball. And so they see in practice, like, how intense I am, and hopefully that what you're doing, and that you can help push them and get them better. And basketball is the bonding agent. It's not like we, hopefully they, they know you're a good person before that, but it's not like there was this great relationship and then you coach them hard. I don't know. I think basketball is the bonding. Like, that's the being in the trenches together, going hard practice, walking out of there, and the kid knows they've gotten better. They got a sweat going, like, man, we got after it today. And they know that, you set the tone for that. That is, or, you pick up a big win in summer or whatever the case is. Like, that is the bonding. Like, like, even when our guys come back, like, you mentioned the CBC game, like, you and I are more likely to talk about that than what type of music you like, Mel. Like, so you have to have that relationship. But I think, basketball can help build that. It doesn't have to be like, for sure this first, and then you can coach hard. Like, it can help build it.
I mean, we could go top 5 rappers if you want to.
Be a lot of like early to mid 2000s for me, and then not a whole lot recent.
How would you, well, maybe not. From your perspective, has there been some sort of any type of shift socially between high school kids when you were JV head coach versus now, whether that's how they interact with each other and or how you interact with them?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think I'm probably not going to have as extreme of an answer as most people because, there's I've said this, but I think most people they like to say, oh, well, kids these days are soft or entitled or lazy or whatever the case is. And I don't think that's the case that when you still hold kids to standards. And I don't think it's really the case with parents either when you're open and you have some communication. So, that's the second thing people like to blame is, it's not all the kids' fault, it's the parents too. And, I think when you're transparent and try to be open with the lines of communication, that's not true. And what I said is, I'll hear teachers complain oh, these kids just don't want to do anything. I'm like, well, we had, 10 kids in Robert's gym at 6 a.m. this morning. I think they're still that. And so, and I think almost because maybe there's some areas, whether it's wherever that the standards have dropped a little bit. I think that, when kids get pushed, it makes them respond even more maybe than used to. So, I don't know. There's probably, there's definitely changes, but I still think, building a relationship with kids and pushing them, I still think it's pretty similar. And you look at, somebody like Blossom who's still doing it so many years later and a very similar manner. That's, I get asked oh, what's it like to coach Scotty? And I'm like, well, he's a lot like every other kid, just with an insane level of talent, but he's still a kid. He's still, he's that. So that's an interesting one because I probably don't think they've changed as much as other people do, in my opinion.
So how we normally end things is, first of all, appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
Coming on here. So how we usually end things is two things. One, any last message you want to get across? Anything you want to speak on? If you have nothing to speak on, a Go Statesman is all good. And then two, this is where I have people plug away where they can find you. I would imagine, unless you have a personal TikTok page that you haven't told us about, the Statesman
Hoops,
Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah. No, man. Just thanks for having me. For those of you guys that didn't get the chance to see Mal play as a player, he was everything we talk about. A guy who put in the work and Drew's phrase, unseen hours, put in a ton of unseen hours to earn his moment and played hard and played tough. So, and just a guy. What I always say about unfortunate is we've always had kids that cared as much as I did. And I've never had to deal with apathy. Even our, a team or two that didn't quite make it as far as I wanted. Those dudes were invested and they cared. And, that's how I know you are about basketball. And, that's why something like this is so fun because you get to, what you're passionate about, you get to chop it up with somebody else who is. So, and I would imagine most people that are going to view this probably are as well. So just a thank you to all the hoop heads out there that care about, are as passionate about it as you and I are. That's awesome. And like you said, Go Statesman.
Yes, sir. And then what's the WG Instagram and Twitter?
Statesman Hoops on both. Statesman Hoops on both.
Sweet. That is, I forget what episode that is, but either way, episode whatever is in the books. Peace.